Hello, welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. It was my choice, wasn't it, this time?
It was, Dan.
And I chose this movie, Ride the Eagle. And you probably have never heard of it. In fact, I guarantee you've never heard of it.
This is the longest profile movie we've done on this show, I believe.
You think so?
That'd be my guess anyways.
Here's actually why I picked it. So like it's been kind of tough to pick some stuff that's new release. It's like we're late in the summer, everything's coming out. There's like Suicide Squad, I could have done that, but I was like, I don't really want to do that.
No.
But you know what really made me do it is we did an episode on, I think it was the first season of the show, on First Cow, which was a really small movie. And I loved doing that episode because it was about like an indie auteur who was doing it. And it's like there's so much sort of passion in that project.
Right.
And it was like kind of really fun to research. And it actually became one of our biggest episodes. Which it wasn't at first, right? When we first did it, it was like, okay, it did okay numbers. But as time has moved on here and we're like a year and some away, it's become basically our biggest episode.
And I think part of that is because First Cow has left an imprint. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Even though it didn't get any Oscar love or any kind of really end of the year love, like it's a total like film nerd movie, and it's going to stick with us, I think. And I think we kind of predicted that in that episode. So,
yeah, it was definitely, and I think that the type of people who are going to listen to our show are going to be into movies like that.
Right.
And so hopefully they're going to be into this movie, Ride the Eagle. It is a small little, I guess, I don't want to call it a pandemic film, but I feel like
it's a pandemic film.
Right. It has to be called a pandemic film.
It does not want to be, but it is.
Yeah. And so it tries to, deny its sort of, its roots, so to speak. But this is a movie directed by Trent O'Donnell, who's a huge TV director. He's probably most well known for his work on The New Girl. New Girl. It's not The New Girl.
Yeah.
New Girl. He did what? 23 episodes, 28 episodes. And in fact, so in his IMDb, it says he did 28 episodes. But later on in some interview, Jake basically says he was like Trent was integral to that entire show and the vibe of the show. So I think he had a huge hand in that, but he's basically directed like, I don't know, 30 TV series. Like you look at his IMDb, it's like insane.
Right.
Now he doesn't like do like, but he does a fair amount of, it's not like 1 or 2 episodes like you normally see from a TV director. It's like 7, 8, 10 episodes. For 20 plus series. It's kind of crazy. So Trent also did some stuff in AP Bio. The Good Place did 3 episodes. Brooklyn Nine-Nine did 3 episodes. But there's like his IMDb is like hard to get through. And so it's his movie. He wrote it with Jake Johnson, who's Nick from The New Girl. I'm going to keep on saying The New Girl. Can't stop.
Because you just saw the Suicide Squad, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is really fun. What a good time that was. And so Jake Johnson and Trent wrote this movie together. Before we dive into what it's about and stuff like that, I think it's kind of interesting. I want to hear your take on Trent O'Donnell a little bit. Are you a New Girl fan? Because I think it's like really integral to talking about this movie because there's a certain overlap here, obviously, with Nick and everything.
Right. So Jake Johnson plays Nick Miller, arguably the best character on New Girl. And so, yeah, I'm a New Girl fan, but I never finished it.
Interesting.
I was one of those fans that, like, my wife and I watched every episode, like week to week basis, probably for the first like 4 seasons.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it just, I don't really know what it was. It's been so long since I've watched an episode. I'm not sure if you can pinpoint, was there something around that point or in season 5 that might have made my wife and I give up on it or just stray from it?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked. Like, I just did an entire rewatch with Pippa here down in Atlanta. We watched every single episode, and this is like the last 2 months. It is an extremely up and down series.
Yeah.
I did the exact same thing you did. I loved the show when it first came out. Well, actually, not when it first came out. When it first came on Netflix, this was like 2015, 2016.
Okay.
As the show was starting to wind down, and I got through probably the first 4 seasons. And then it's like the 5th season. It just sort of it ran its course. I don't know, how you'd put it. It just sort of got old and tired. But on the rewatch, I sort of realized that like the strongest season in that show probably is season 4. And it's almost like it, by the time you get into season 5, it's sort of like, well, why are we spinning our wheels here? Like this, it's already done. Like the good stuff is over. And as you get towards the end, it does drag significantly. And there's a final season that's like 7, 8 episodes. And it's like, it's okay. It's a good sort of end to the whole thing, but like it's not vital viewing, I wouldn't say.
Wait, so when do Jess and Nick hook up in the show?
Oh my god, like twice. They do it at the end of, I want to say end of season 2, which is the worst season, by the way. Season 2 is the worst season of that show, without a doubt. It completely loses its way. The vibe is off. The jokes don't land as much. They must have like new writers for season, like the back half of season 3 into season 4, I think is probably the best. But yeah, it's an off again, on again thing, and then they end up together, and you're like, this doesn't make any sense.
But then like, they do it. Yeah, like the season 4 finale is titled Clean Break. That's when they officially say, like, we're not going to do this again.
I guess, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
And then they come back together and they get, like, married, I guess. Spoiler alert.
I don't know. It's fine. But yeah, I'm like season 1 through 4, like some of these episode titles. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. But then season 5 is just like, I don't see anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's too bad, but that's the nature, especially of like network sitcoms, right? It was not a Netflix or a Hulu show, even though that's where we watched it. It was on Fox, and one of the most interesting things that I read, I didn't know anything about Trent O'Donnell. It's pretty commonplace, I think, for even like nerds like us that like pay attention to who's making things. Mm-hmm. Like network TV is a completely different ball game because like Jake Kasdan set up the visual look of New Girl, right?
Sure.
But he also had to do it according, I'm sure, to like house style rules in Foxland, and it's pretty like the atmosphere and the aesthetic of that show is not what makes it. It's the cast and characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, yeah, to start transitioning us back into Ride the Eagle territory, I feel like that's kind of the vibe I get. Like there isn't a strong signature feel to it, because it very much feels like this guy O'Donnell has been, doing his regular thing. Not only 28 episodes of New Girl, a few episodes of The Good Place, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, AP Bio. He had a couple hit shows in Australia before he migrated over to LA. The original version of Review, which was adapted in 2014 for US audiences on Comedy Central, Andy Daly. Haven't seen the Australian version, but I absolutely adore the US one. And he also had another show called No Activity, that was a hit and adapted for CBS All Access, now known as Paramount Plus. But I don't know anything about that. So it's very much, but like he's like kind of your traditional standard sitcom director.
Yes.
At least in like the single camera world, right? Like he doesn't, he's not a multicam guy. And so he's not going to, it's not going to feel as much of like a play when he does something outside of the sitcom world. Yeah. But yeah, it kind of feels here in Ride the Eagle like it's just super brightly lit, which makes sense considering that they wanted to shoot it in Yellowstone. Yes. And it takes place in the mountains.
Yosemite.
Yeah, Yosemite. Sorry, I just had a friend that got back from Yellowstone. That's probably
both wonderful parks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've never been to either.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of the deal. I feel like when TV directors make the leap to feature film, would you say that's a fair assumption that it's like there's not going to be a lot of panache, there's not going to be a lot of really cinema-centric choices? It really feels like he was 100%, maybe 90% relying on his cast and 10% relying on the vistas.
Yeah, it's funny. When I watched the movie, I didn't notice that. But like now that we're talking about it, I'm looking back like, oh yeah, this was shot like TV. Like, this is not cinematic, really, in any traditional sense. Now, did it have to be? I mean, not really. I mean, it's a very small film.
Right.
I mean, I'll do the plot line real quick. So Jake Johnson, it's essentially him and his dog, and there's a few other characters in it. But a man's estranged mother dies and leaves him a conditional inheritance. Before he can move into her picturesque cabin in Yosemite, he has to complete her to-do list and step into his mother's world as she tries to make amends from beyond the grave. His mother is Susan Sarandon, who basically only exists in a videotape that she leaves him. So it's a very small film. I love the subgenres you have here, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Twee wave, plaidcore, and cabin cinema. I love cabin cinema. Yeah, so it's a very small film. Did you find budget information on this?
No, it's not out there. But they financed it themselves, O'Donnell and Johnson.
That's a huge point. Like, there's no studio involved here. It is them essentially writing checks, as they say in one of the interviews. So it's. I mean, I think can we say it's like a micro budget film?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's call it a micro budget film.
Which makes sense because Johnson also has experience working with Joe Swanberg from the mumblecore genre in both Drinking Buddies, which I think we're both big fans of.
Love that movie.
And then some other movie that I didn't even know, a Netflix film. What's it called? What is it?
All In, maybe, or something?
Win It All.
Movie? Win It All. Yeah. Which I haven't seen yet.
But now I want to see, since Keegan-Michael Key and Joe Latrulio are also in it.
Yeah. It's, oh man, you're bringing up a lot, and I want to respond to everything.
Go for it. I'll shut up for a bit.
No. You're good. It's like, it's a super small film, and like, it feels small. It's shot like a TV kind of series. That's all plain to see. It is interesting, this mumblecore angle, because like, I don't know about I hated that subgenre of film, like absolutely despised it. It's almost like I created a persona that would be completely against that and whatever it was. It's just like I hated it. Like it's like anti-hipster or something. I'm a weirdo. In any event, then I saw Drinking Buddies. The first time I saw it, I absolutely hated it. And then I saw it again. And it became one of my favorite movies of all time. In fact, I think it's in my top like 20 from that decade.
Wow.
There's something about it. And I think there's a huge connection here to that, because I feel like a lot of this, because it was self-financed, because it's very small, the stakes are very low here. Mm-hmm. It was completely filmed during the pandemic, essentially kind of moving the conception of it a bit. Jake Johnson got a dog, Nora. She was a retired guide dog. He has this dog. It basically goes on about how smart she is. He wasn't doing anything. He's friends with Trent O'Donnell, obviously from New Girl. He wasn't doing anything. And I think Trent had like one friend who had film equipment that wasn't being used. So it was like one thing led to another. And they're like, well, let's do a movie with me and this dog. And kind of it snowballed from there. Like Susan Sarandon was involved immediately. J.K. Simmons wasn't involved at all in the beginning. It was just this small idea of let's just do something during the pandemic. We're all like kind of getting cabin fever, so to speak, and sort of, let's make some art is essentially what it comes down to. And I think that, like, I don't know, as someone who is tangentially creative, who spends a lot of my free time doing creative stuff, there is a certain sort of boldness that is required to make something, especially outside a studio system.
Yeah.
So it's like, was it ballsy? Not necessarily, but it's sort of like, it's like ballsy and boredom at the same time.
Right. It's definitely seemed born out of boredom.
Yeah, exactly. And so, whether that's a good or a bad thing, I mean, we'll see as we sort of talk about it a little bit more. I don't know, like what would you relate this to? Like, what is another, would you call this, is it mumblecore? It's not really mumblecore, right?
No, it's not quiet enough.
Correct. Yeah.
To be mumblecore, but it does make you wonder, like, this movie wouldn't exist if we didn't have a pandemic, right?
Would never happen.
It would never happen. So it's hard to kind of imagine, like, where this movie really fits in, because the last time we had a pandemic, we didn't have like a filmmaking industry like we do today. It was nascent the last time we had one. And so I think that there's this is a small film, it's not a quiet one, and while it's a micro budget film, it's not really even a subversive. I would say it's a pretty like playful, low key. Like the creators, O'Donnell and Johnson, seem to readily admit it in their press interviews that this is, they're not really trying to say much. And so I feel like that's maybe where the mumblecore connection is strongest, because that was one of the tenets of that whole subgenre of filmmaking, was like, we're not trying to do message movies, we're not trying to be blockbusters, we're not even really trying to be like indie darlings, we're just trying to make what we can with what we have available. And that's exactly where this came in. Like, if O'Donnell didn't know somebody who had film equipment, if they didn't get lucky sending the script to Sarandon and Simmons, like none of these pieces would have come together to the point where then you have two distributors going after it. Maybe it would have gotten made with lesser known names in those supporting roles, but I don't know if really it would have attracted all that attention without those two pretty big award-winning names in the supporting cast.
Yeah, I mean, like, Jake Johnson's not going to attract, and right, like,
right.
He's not. He's such a fascinating dude too, because he's a guy who's had a career that is all over the place. Like, he obviously, New Girl, that was a big thing for him. But then Drinking Buddies, Let's Be Cops. Remember that movie?
Oh, it's such a travesty.
Yeah, like he was in that, but that was big. He's in Jurassic World.
Yeah, I mean, he's friends with Colin Trevorrow, the director of that new Jurassic franchise, because he was in the 2012 movie Safety Not Guaranteed, which was Trevorrow's kind of entrance to the scene. And
then he plays opposite Tom Cruise in The Mummy, which is the failed kickoff of the Dark Universe from Universal, I think, right? Mm-hmm. He's a weird guy, and like I have this weird thing on YouTube. There's a show called Off Camera. You ever heard of it?
No.
It's an interview show shot in black and white. It's very pretentious, but I love every second of it. And he sits down with entertainers and actors. It's the same interview. I forget his name. But Jake Johnson has an episode, and I've watched these interviews with him, and it's like little snippets of interviews with him for probably like maybe 20 minutes total. Dude is really, really interesting. Like, he dropped out of high school but with the permission of his mother. He's from Chicago, and like completely dropped out of high school. He's like, I'm not going to do any work. Why would I do this? His mom's like, okay, go ahead and do it. Ended up like working for his grifter uncle for a while. And like really kind of seems like he's the type of person who clearly does exactly what he wants to do. And he was talking about being on The Mummy, and he was like, I just wanted to be near Tom Cruise and see what it was like to be near someone like that. But he's very adamant about not wanting fame. He's like, he does not want to be famous. He does not want to be a leading man. He's like, I just like to show up and act and do my thing and make sure that it is fun and playful, and then go do something else. And so like you can see a lot of that and how this movie came into being. This reminds me, the way that it kind of like connects to Mumblecore to me is this kind of what you said, making do with what you have, but there's also this element of play involved.
Yeah.
Where it's like, these are really creative people. These are people that, sure, they're successful as a director, they're successful as an actor, but you can kind of tell, especially in Jake Johnson's perspective, he doesn't do it necessarily for the money or success. That helps a lot. He clearly does it just because he loves to act, and he loves to put himself in different creative situations to sort of act, find a way to act through it. And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of that, at least in the conception of this. And we talk about like, how did they get J.K. Simmons and Susan Sarandon involved?
It's
like,
interesting.
It's like,
yeah.
It's like,
so
how? Like, what's going on?
O'Donnell did an interview with Slash Film in which he kind of breaks that down. First off, Susan Sarandon, they wrote this part of the main character, Leaf's deceased mother, with her in mind. Like, they literally wrote in the script like a Sarandon type woman. And they, I mean, just like you were saying, like there is a boldness here, even if it's very kind of low key and muted, where they just thought like, well, we got to at least start there. So they send the script out to Sarandon, and she's like, okay, I'm in. It's as simple as that, and they go out to New York and shoot her scenes, which are just, they like literally went to her apartment and just like made it up to look like this character's place. And it seems like such a wild thing to imagine for a first time feature filmmaker, even if somebody that has a long standing foot in the door from doing television work. But similar kind of deal with J.K. Simmons. O'Donnell, clearly the kind of guy that probably makes a lot of connections with guest actors on episodes of TV, and at some point he asked J.K. Simmons for his phone number, just like out of the typical protocol of like contacting an agent or publicist, and Simmons gave it to him because he is that kind of guy. And so he just emailed JK directly with this role. Carl, Susan Sarandon's character's kind of new lover shortly before she dies. And he says, yeah, this sounds good. I like it. And O'Donnell's like, okay, so what works for you? Thinking like, there's no way I'm going to be able to schedule both Sarandon and Simmons. But because it's the pandemic, like, Simmons is like, I don't have anything going on. I'm literally wide open. And like the pieces start falling into place. So it's pretty impressive. Like I said, you had to have those network connections in the beginning to be able to like do things like send your script to Susan Sarandon and get J.K. Simmons' direct email address. But the fact that, they were one of the only couple of guys trying to make a movie, and this is pre-vaccine pandemic. Yeah. Like they are like literally everything's shut down. And yet, because they're doing it kind of off the grid, they have a crew of like I think they said like 7 or something.
7 people, yeah.
That's insane for a movie that's co-starring Susan Sarandon and Oscar winner J.K. Simmons, and yet that's how they got it done. And I was trying to understand this other quote you had in our notes, Dan, where it was like, because obviously Sarandon's just separated from it. They just film her parts, her making this video for her son from beyond the grave. But then like there's a direct like big scene between Jake and JK, but they filmed it in such a way that Johnson did his coverage and then JK did his. So it seems like just like the phone scenes with Jake Johnson and Darcy Carden, those are filmed separately. And so they did the same thing for the one big scene between Johnson and Simmons, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like everything.
It's pieced together.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically, there's a great quote where he's like, Jake Johnson's like, I don't want to ruin anything for the audience, but everything in this movie was faked. Right. So it's like, yeah, there's no one really in the same room together. There's a couple of scenes where it looks like it looks like it, but they're probably not. And again, like you said, this is before vaccine. So like if you got it, like you just can't get it, essentially is what it comes down to. And there is a guerrilla sort of aspect to what they were doing, right? Mm-hmm. Shot the movie in 10 days. Who shoots a movie in 10 days? That makes no sense.
Yeah.
The one thing too that I found pretty interesting is it sounds like because they had a lot of time on their hands, there was a ton of rehearsal and a ton of writing. So like where it definitely diverts a lot from Mumblecore. Mumblecore I think had a lot of rehearsal, but the writing was a little bit looser. It was one of the tenets of it was improvisation, right?
Right. You sketch out a basic story, but you don't actually write lines of dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like, there's a really amazing scene in Drinking Buddies between him and Olivia Wilde, right? Mm-hmm. And none of it was written. And it's fantastic. It's like the very like culmination of like their emotional fight or whatever. I'm like, this is unbelievable. Totally improvised. None of those lines were written. This is not like that at all. This is definitely hyper rehearsed and maybe even overwritten on some level. But yeah, I mean, I think that the means of production here are really fascinating because it does not have any of the traditional sort of sort of staff, any of the sort of guardrails of a studio production. That's all out the window. This is people like going up to Yosemite. They have a cabin. And I think Jake had the cabin before they were going to shoot the movie. He's like, oh, I got this cabin. Let's go shoot up there and do it. It's like indie filmmaking 101. And like, yeah, the fact that it's like from two guys that have definitely some cachet and connections, that's an important point. But at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter what your connections are when you're up there in the cabin trying to shoot it. Right. It's like, you got to do it. It's like, you may be able to get, step up the bat, but you got to hit the ball, essentially, is what it comes down to. So I thought, like, yeah, it's a really interesting way that it was created. Essentially, like, shot 10 days. They would get up, shoot the night, nice light outside. Then we'd come back in. We'd have something to eat, shoot some interiors during the day. Then we'd jump back outside, go hard for that sort of magic hour, low, pretty light in the afternoon. Then at night we go back inside, we all eat, and we were all cooking ourselves as well every night. So it's like almost like a communal sort of situation. Do you feel like, and here's the one thing, when I read this, it's like I didn't really see that on the screen. What I saw on the screen was a very sort of, and I'll say that I really like this movie a lot. I think it's cute. I think it's sweet. But how this thing was made and produced, it doesn't translate on the screen as much. Like when I think of guerrilla filmmaking or indie filmmaking, there's a certain aesthetic and style and experimentation that you usually see, and that's not in here. Did you see that at all? And it kind of harkens back to what you're talking about, like the TV direction. Right.
And I mean, that's part of the deal, right? Is there's this almost, I don't know, like, there's this juxtaposition that just didn't quite sit well with me, to be honest. I think you like this movie more than I did. I admire this movie more than I enjoyed it. But especially after doing the research on it, I think that like the professionalism and like the clean cutness of it was really at odds with a lot of the, like, that was my first guess when I'm watching the phone conversation between Johnson and Carden. It did not feel like these were two people talking to each other. And I know that's done a lot in film, not even in pandemic movies, where it doesn't make sense for whatever XYZ reason to legitimately film two actors talking to each other when they are having a phone conversation. But it just didn't, like, I didn't get that connection there. I would say like the only time where I did get tricked was that big scene between Jake and JK. I think, if anything, that scene is worth the price of admission alone. It was really fun watching two very talented guys kind of hit off each other in a way that you wouldn't expect, like a forgotten son and a current, mother's lover to interact. I think that's really enjoyable, but then also same thing with there's some strangeness in like the interactions between Jake and his band's manager or his agent. I don't know,
really
whatever
get that relationship at all.
It's so strange. Like he lives on the property of this guy who also seems to manage the band, but also just like manage Jake or Leaf personally, because I don't know. There's some confusingness going on there, and every time those two actors interact, it feels kind of forced. And I mean, the whole Leaf's backstory and his mother's backstory, for that matter, I just kept like waiting for the movie to dig into it, and it didn't, because it didn't want to. It didn't want to.
Do you need to? Do you need to? This is a pandemic movie. You do need to.
I mean, this is a guy whose mom left him when he was 12 to go join a cult, and maybe my brain's just engineered to like want to know everything about the cult and the trauma that this kid must have endured. But no, he seems like he's doing okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, his backstory is a little bit light.
Yeah.
And I think that like what I thought was interesting for a movie about a son coming to terms with his mother's death, there didn't seem to be a lot about what the relationship was like before she left.
Right.
And that was a little bit odd to me, because it was like, well, a lot of his feelings are going to be sort of planted in that time and his emotional recollection of that time with her. And we don't get a lot of that. In fact, like, he seems pretty flat overall about his mother's death. And like, look, Jake Johnson plays that style. That's kind of who he is. He doesn't really emote all that much. But you know, I could see how it seemed a little bit definitely strange in a movie about grief. Grief is rooted in emotional connection, right? Like, what was their emotional connection, if any?
Right.
So like that's where like maybe the writing. But hey, to be defensive about it, because I'm going to be.
Go for it.
I will say that, like, I get all of that criticism, but ultimately, I think what makes this film click for me is it kind of goes back to how it was conceived and how it came to be. And he says this in a couple of interviews where he's like, we basically reverse engineered it.
Mm-hmm.
We had these elements, and then that was it. We didn't have a blank slate. We had like a small piece of clay is like what we were going to mold this into. And to me, there is a pretty keen awareness of sort of the narrative elements of the story and not delving into these side paths. It's very tight, I would say, from a narrative element, narrative sort of flow. And it shouldn't be, because like they talk about the tone going all over the place, and it does. But there is this sort of propulsion to the story where we know where it's going. We know that he's going to come to terms with his mother's death. You know there's going to be some sort of release, maybe some sort of epiphany. And they hit the notes, to me at least, they hit the notes at the right time in the right way, so that by the end of it, it is the journey that you expected. But to me, it felt very, very pleasurable. It was a pleasurable journey.
Okay.
And it kind of goes to like one of the, one of the reviews. This is Richard Whitaker from the Austin Chronicle. He said, Ride the Eagle knows that a small, sad personal story doesn't have to be a tragedy. If it was a trail, it would be marked on the map as intermediate, but the view at the end is definitely worth the walk. That's exactly how I felt about this film. It shouldn't work. It just should not. Like, there's not enough meat on the bones for it to land a really strong emotional punch. But somehow it comes through, and I don't know how. It sounds like you're on a little different perspective than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. Part of it is that, like, I don't know if we've ever really talked about this on the show, because what I always want to do going into a movie that I know little about is to keep it that way as much as possible. I never like try to dig into our notes too much until after I actually see the movie, because I want to see if it works on its own merits before kind of learning its origin story.
Yeah.
And I definitely resonated more with kind of like the middle negative reviews. Neely Swanson of Easy Reader said it's certainly been done worse, but it's been a whole lot better. Also, it made me want to do a deep dive on one of my favorite movies, 5 Easy Pieces, because this falls into that exact. There's so many movies that have been like low key, their plots lifted from the Jack Nicholson classic about a guy that is estranged from his family, and he has to face going back to them, either literally or figuratively, when either the patriarch or the matriarch dies. And we've seen this over and over again, obviously. Like, obviously, I'm thinking about Garden State too.
Yeah.
And there is something missing. Just like I thought there was something missing in Garden State with regards to Ian Holm's father character when Zach Braff returns. There's such a power going back to Jack Nicholson and his character as an oil rigger, former classical pianist, coming back to his like East Coast hoity-toity family, where it's like that juxtaposition works like gangbusters. but
Mhm.
I get it. Like they're trying to do something smaller here. Like you've said, more playful. It's not going to be as combative, but they're also using a lot of language and buzzwords that feel combative, like cult, and like she's been trying to go to his concerts and he's been like cold shouldering her for like decades.
Yeah.
And none of that comes out. And I kept hoping that she does this list. She reads through it, Susan Sarandon's character, on the VHS tape. These are the things you have to do if you want to inherit the family cabin, and none of those really hit. They're just kind of like generic tasks, like little scavenger hunt, treasure hunt thingies that have some kind of like very platitudinal, like express yourself or be one with nature, and like it's just nothing ever really that interesting. When I feel like if I was leaving a videotape for my kids, I would come up with something a little better than that.
But I mean, isn't the videotape whole thing? It's kind of indicative of their relationship. Like she's trying to manipulate him beyond the grave.
Right.
There's this sort of like, and he's sucked back into that relationship where she is trying to get something out of him without giving much back, is really what it comes down to. But like, right. I don't know. I see what you're saying though. But
he still goes through them. Like I kept asking myself, like, why is he doing it? Like, why would he go to such lengths for this woman that he's, blocked out of his life for decades? I don't really understand.
There's probably like I don't know. There's like a grief element to it. In fact, you said this. You're funny. Pippa said the same thing when we were watching this. She's like, why is he doing this?
Right?
And I'm like, well, I think to him, he's just curious. He's curious about what,
and he's bored, right?
Yeah, he's not. He's directionless.
He's a bongo player in a band full of kids 20 years younger than him.
What's the band called? Restaurant.
Restaurant.
What a great
that was smart. I like that.
The typical like indie, whatever LA band or something. Yeah, and I think the critics are definitely more on your side of this, and so is the like 77% on Rotten Tomatoes. 61 out of 100, which is not great. A 54 on Metacritic, which is also not good. The audience score is pretty similar, 76%, 78 out of 100, definitely higher on the actual score. Letterboxd I thought was fun, 66, which is kind of decent. Also a 66 in IMDb, and a 74 Google rating. Lukewarm is what I would say is the response, both from critics and from just the average moviegoer. Why do you think that is?
Something just popped in my head. Is like I was trying to think of something that would really make us understand, the boldness that would take to make a movie kind of guerrilla style in the middle of a pandemic. And land such A-listers for the supporting cast, but then wind up with something that's pretty temperate, pretty lukewarm.
Yeah, there's no edge to this.
Well, I kept I once the thing probably a thing from since I was a kid is like anytime I press play on a movie or go to a movie and I don't understand why the title is the title and I'm just waiting for it to make sense during the movie. And this was a classic example of just like, why the fuck is this movie called Ride the Eagle? And then it's just this stupid thing, like a running gag in the film is that Susan Sarandon's character is a bad painter, but she loves to paint no matter what, and she just like paints everything from like rhinoceroses having sex to like squirrels riding eagles. And then there's this one painting that Jake's character Leaf finds under his mother's bed, and it says "Ride the Eagle" on it. And they were originally going to name the movie Green Lake, which is like the name of the special spot where she wants her ashes scattered. Or they were going to call it Eleanor, which I think is the mother's character's birth name, not Honey, which is the nickname that they call her throughout the film. But they decided once they found this painting, and all these paintings were done by Jake Johnson's wife, for the film. They just thought it was such a silly painting that they just lifted that title from the work of art for the film. And that's kind of where it feels like I'm at odds with the film, like I think a lot of critics and maybe some other audience members too, where it's like it feels like there's so much potential here. There's so much things that are happening that are interesting, both in the seeds of where this movie came from, as well as with like just, I mean, there's a reason the Five Easy Pieces story keeps getting done over and over again, is because everybody has a story like that at some point in their adult life where somebody dies that should have been close to them but wasn't, and you have this kind of weird reaction to it, and yet they didn't really care about that so much as they cared about just, you know, having, you know, killing boredom in a cabin in a beautiful part of America during a horrible, tragic event in American history. So I just feel like that's what you end up with, is like something that is kind of meh at the end of the day.
What I can't understand is, like, I definitely agree with that sentiment that, like, there's nothing here that really pops. Even from like an indie perspective, it's not like an A24 film, like that movie. Like, they just had this trailer come out called Lamb. Have you seen this trailer?
Oh yeah.
It's like, that's A24. Like, that to me, there's a certain type of indie filmmaking that is all about sort of the sucker punch of, wow, that's crazy. Hereditary is, you know, a good example of that. Why do you, I mean, what I find strange about this is that, like, okay, one, I understand how it was made. I understand the final result. But then there's like people trying to actually distribute this thing, like Decal, a new independent distributor that launched earlier this year. They bought the worldwide rights to this thing. The UK distributor, Lightbulb Film Distribution, said this is kind of one of its high profile acquisitions. I don't get, like, I don't see a lot of money here, I guess is what I'm saying.
No.
It's like, why? Who is buying this? Why are they putting it out? What's the audience? Because this was direct to VOD. Am I right in saying that?
I think it had a very limited release.
Yeah, there's like no box office numbers for it at all.
Right. Yeah. So probably just New York, LA, maybe Chicago, since Jake's from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was bought for distribution by Decal, which is a newer joint venture into the distribution world between the pretty big indie companies Neon and Bleecker Street. So it seems like they're just trying to get off the ground. It feels like they did something similar last year, a movie that was seemed like it had a solid cast and maybe had enough of like an Oscar bait hook to it that they thought maybe they could domino effect it into something. It was the Colin Firth, Stanley Tucci dementia buddy drama Supernova, which had some rave reviews, but definitely not uniform rave reviews at Sundance. That came out in January of this year and just died. It was DOA.
Totally DOA, yeah.
But they do have another movie coming out later this year, Spencer, which is the Princess Diana biopic starring Kristen Stewart. So it feels like, I don't know, it almost feels just like, rehearsal, like warm-ups. Supernova, Ride the Eagle. Let's see, can we get in on the, light comedy and, make our money back? Can we make our money back on this, like, kind of serious illness drama? But I feel like they're probably mostly banking on Kristen Stewart to bring it home for them. I don't know. I don't see any other reason really to buy this. And same thing with the UK. Lightbulb Film Distribution got it. They have not really had a hit yet. They started in 2018 with a movie called Reborn. Rent-A-Pal had some buzz last year. That's the Will Wheaton dark comedy about like the guy that said, you can purchase him to be your friend on the internet. But other than that, they've got a thriller coming out next year that sounds kind of interesting called Come True, about a kid that does a sleep study, like psych program thing, and then his dreams start coming to life. That has potential maybe, but it very much feels like, I don't know, since Johnson and O'Donnell are pretty low key and just were killing time and made this movie for no other reason than they could, and all the pieces fit together, is like they probably took any distribution deal they could land, because they self-finance and they don't really care about making their money back.
Yeah, it's sort of, I don't know, it has a side project feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just sort of like, hey, we did this, let's try and make some money, let's try to recoup our costs. That's probably what all they cared about. And not like, they're not looking to get rich, but like there was no way this movie was going to be anything other than that. And like, I'm surprised that it even got released in the way that it did. Why didn't they sell to Netflix? Why didn't they sell to Hulu?
They probably didn't get offers.
I don't know. They're like, Netflix puts out like such trash on a daily basis.
True.
That's like not even remotely decent content. That like, and they're all clamoring for content too. It's like, I just think it's too niche.
Yeah.
Right. This is for like, it's for people who love to hate mumblecore. So it's made for people like me. That's it. And there's maybe 500 of me in the country. Something like that. In any event, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting movie, and it's definitely a movie you should watch if you're interested in like independent filmmaking and how you write a story and create a film with very sort of strict restrictions on how you're making the film. And it's just like a cool little art project. That's what it is. I don't know what are your final thoughts on it?
Yeah, I know, I like that. I think that it very much has the vibe. Like it's Jake Johnson's wife's paintings she just did for funsies during the pandemic that end up getting used in the film. And so Jake Johnson, being a writer and actor, was looking for the equivalent of that. And so I think that it's worth seeing, if not, like I said earlier, there is a really great scene. J.K. Simmons kills it like he always does in a small but vital role in the film. But other than that, it's, I think, worth seeing just to kind of, I do appreciate the fact that they weren't trying to make a pandemic movie about the pandemic. I do appreciate that there is some kind of quaintness to it that you wouldn't really get from, I can't think of another movie that this vibe-wise feels like. Because yeah, it's too glossy to be mumblecore, and it's too small to be really anything that you would typically find on the splash page for a major streaming service. It's a little one you have to dig out for, and I think those are always worth seeing, oftentimes much more so than like the Suicide Squad or any other big blockbuster that everybody's going to see anyways.
What do we got coming up next week? It's a season finale, by the way.
Season 4 finale is next week, and then we're going to take a hiatus for a little bit. Dan and I will figure out how long that'll be. But with back to school and the seasons changing, it might be a bit. We do have a fun finale in store for you. I had no idea, Dan, that you had just rewatched this a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I saw that it was coming to Hulu this month. It's now available free on Hulu. The 1991 action drama Toy Soldiers. It's the 30th anniversary. David Coop, one of his first produced scripts, starring Sean Astin and Will Wheaton. It is, in my memory anyways, a really fun watch, and I look forward to talking about it with you next week, Dan.
Awesome. I'm excited. Yeah, I just rewatched it. It's one of those movies that my sister taped off of HBO.
Oh,
back
nice.
in the day, and so it's definitely, there's an old copy of that in my parents' basement somewhere. In any event, join us for the season finale next week, Toy Soldiers. This has been Film Trace.